Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start tonight's story, I want you to think about something. The most dangerous man in any room is almost never the loudest one. He's the one you forgot was there. Tonight's story is about a man who spent 20 years being forgotten on purpose. A ghost for Delta Force. The kind of soldier whose missions never got names, whose face never made it into photographs, whose whole job was walking into the lion's den wearing someone else's life. And when he finally came home for good, his wife's new boyfriend texted him from her phone, "Your side of the bed is taken. Come home and I'll put you in the ground, soldier." They burned his clothes on the front lawn. They laughed at him from his own porch. And this quiet man just nodded once and drove away. What happened over the next 96 hours is one of the most surgical takedowns I have ever researched. No punches, no threats, no crimes. Just patience, paperwork, and a memory like a bear trap. And when his motel door came off its hinges at 2 in the morning, 5 men, badges and guns, they finally understood what he'd been doing all along. Stay with me. This one's special. The sign above the shop said Ames Neon and, sign in letters of bent glass that glowed the color of a desert sunrise, and the man who bent that glass had spent most of his adult life not existing. His name was Donovan Ames. He was 49 years old, and for 20 years, the United States Army had paid him to be other people. Not a trigger puller, not a door kicker, though he had trained beside the best of them at Fort Bragg and could still put a group the size of a quarter into a target at 200 yards. But something rarer. Donovan had belonged to a small, unlisted element inside the Delta community that the men who knew about it simply called the ghost shop. His job was cover, legends, paper lives built so carefully they could survive a border interrogation. He had walked into a warlord's compound in a pressed shirt, carrying a ledger, introduced himself as an insurance auditor from Karachi, and walked out 3 days later with the man's entire financial network memorized. He had been a Belgian antiquities dealer, a Canadian water engineer, a grief counselor, a dead man's cousin. 20 years of missions that never got names, in countries he was never in, doing things that never happened. The skill underneath all of it was not lying. That was what people always got wrong, the few who ever learned anything about him. The skill was seeing. A ghost survives by reading rooms the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. Who is armed, who is frightened, who owes money to whom, which smile is real, and which one is rented. And a ghost documents everything. Donovan had been trained until it was reflex. Every receipt photographed, every arrival logged, every anomaly written down in a small, patient hand, because the detail you failed to record was the detail that got you killed. He retired at 46 with a folded flag, a handshake from a colonel who was not allowed to say what for, and a box of medals he could never explain. He came home to Copperline, Arizona, a copper mining town gone quiet, 2 hours southeast of Phoenix, where the mountains turned the color of an old penny at dusk. His father had been a signman there in the 70s, back when Copperline's Main Street buzzed with neon, and Donovan had grown up on a stepladder handing him tubes of glowing glass. So when the army was done with him, Donovan bought the corner building at First in Yucca, hung out his own sign, and taught himself to be one man for the first time since he was 26. He restored the old marquees nobody else could fix. He rewired the Roadrunner outside the Sagebrush Motel until it sprinted again in 3 colors. Ranchers drove signs in from 3 counties. It was quiet work, precise work, work you did with steady hands and a flame. And Donovan discovered that he loved being a man who made light for a living after 2 decades of living in the dark. He had married Darla in 2013, back between deployments, when she was a leasing agent with a laugh that filled a room, and he was a man who came home 8 weeks a year. That was the honest arithmetic of it, and Donovan never pretended otherwise. She had married a uniform and gotten a roomer. For years, the marriage ran on absence, long phone calls from airports he could not name, anniversaries celebrated on the wrong dates, a woman keeping a house alone, and a man mailing home money from nowhere. When he finally retired, they were strangers who shared a mortgage. He knew it. He was patient with it. Patience was the one thing he had an endless supply of, and he figured 3 years of showing up, coffee made at 6, her car serviced, her mother's roof fixed with his own hands, could rebuild what a decade of vanishing had starved. For a while, it almost seemed to work. Then, around the spring of last year, the pattern shifted, And Donovan Ames had spent 20 years staying alive by noticing exactly that. It started with the gym. Warpath Fitness had squatted in a converted tractor dealership 4 blocks from Donovan's shop for years. Black paint, a flame-lettered logo, a row of lifted trucks out front every morning by 5. The owner was a local celebrity of the particular small-town kind. Brock Strickland, 51, a slab of a man with a gray chin-strap beard, forearms like bridge cable, and a story for every stool in every bar in town. Brock told people he had been an Army Ranger. He wore the tab on a hoodie. He gave a speech every Veterans Day at the fairgrounds about brotherhood and sacrifice, and the town clapped, because the town had reasons to clap for a Strickland. There were 5 Strickland brothers, and the other 4 wore badges. Randall was a patrol sergeant, the eldest, silver-haired and smiling. Wayne ran the K-9 unit. Perry ran the evidence room, a soft-spoken man with reading glasses who knew where everything was. Garland, the youngest, worked traffic and drove the newest cruiser. Their late father had been a Copperline police captain for 30 years. In Copperline, the Stricklands were not a family. They were a weather system. Darla joined Warpath in March. By April, she had a personal training package. By May, she was tagging the gym in photographs. Her at sunrise in new gear Donovan had never seen her buy. Brock's huge hand flat on her shoulder blade in the back of one frame like a brand. She started keeping her phone face down on the counter. She changed its passcode in June. Donovan knew because the old 4-corner swipe of her thumb, a pattern his eyes had recorded without permission, the way they recorded everything, suddenly took her 2 tries. She smelled different on Thursdays. She got a second phone charger for her car, for a phone that never seemed to need charging at home. Little things. Tells. A ghost reads tells for a living, and the reading broke his heart a 1/4 inch at a time. He did not rage. He did not follow her. He did what he was trained to do. He observed and he logged. A small notebook, the patient hand. Thursday, 6:40 p.m., told me spin class. Gym closed at 6 on Thursdays all summer. He was not building a case yet. He was doing the only thing he knew how to do with pain, which was to write it down and keep his hands steady. In August, Brock Strickland walked into Ames' neon and sign with a business offer. He filled the doorway and grinned like a man who had never once been told no in Copperline. He wanted the building, the corner lot, First and Yucca, the best commercial corner left on the strip. Warpath was expanding, he said. Cold plunge, juice bar, supplement retail. He would do Donovan a favor and take the place off his hands at 2/3 of what the county assessor said it was worth. Donovan listened all the way through, the torch hissing low behind him, and then said, politely, that the shop was not for sale. Brock's grin cooled about 10 degrees. On his way out, he paused at the door and looked around the workshop. The racked glass, the transformers, the half-restored marquee letters spelling Copperline on the back wall. The way a man looks at something he has already decided belongs to him. Everything's for sale in this town, Chief, he said. Some sellers just take longer to figure out their price. Donovan wrote that down too. It is worth pausing, as the summer heat broke, to say plainly what Donovan Ames still did not know, and what Copperline had never wanted to know, about the Strickland brothers. Warpath Fitness lost money on paper every single quarter, and thrived anyway, because the gym was not a business. It was a junction box. Through its back room moved the guts of a tidy little empire. Anabolic steroids that Perry Strickland quietly rotated out of the evidence room after cases closed, resold at wholesale to gym rats and to cops in 3 neighboring towns. Protection arrangements with half the bars on the strip, paid in cash sponsorships for Warpath's powerlifting team. Insurance money from a suspiciously convenient pipe flood 2 winters back that had bought the new turf floor. Randall managed appetites. Wayne managed fear. His dogs found drugs in the cars of men who complained, with remarkable regularity. Perry managed paper. Garland, young and hungry, managed to look the other way while learning the family trade. And Chief Dub Hensley, 62 and 18 months from a pension the Strickland's father had once protected, managed nothing at all, which was exactly what he was kept around to manage. And beneath all of it, like a body under a patio, lay the thing the brothers never spoke about, the thing that had cost them a favor so large it bound them to Brock forever. A summer night in 2019, a county road, something that had been filed, signed, alibied, and buried. The Stricklands believed it was gone, because they had been the ones holding the shovels, and in Copperline, Nobody dug where a Strickland had smoothed the dirt. That October, the marriage ended the way a bridge ends. Not slowly, all at once. Donovan drove to Phoenix on a Tuesday to deliver a restored theater marquee, a job he had discussed at the dinner table for a week, which is to say the trip was known, scheduled, and watched. The delivery went long. He stopped for gas outside Florence at 9:41 p.m., and his phone lit up with a message from Darla's number. He read it standing under the white canopy lights, 18-wheelers moaning past on the highway, and the world went very still and very clear, the way it always had for him right before things got loud. "Your side of the bed is taken. Come home, and I'll put you in the ground, soldier." The word soldier told him everything. Darla had never once called him soldier. It was a man's word, a barstool word, a word chosen by someone who wanted him to know, and had wanted to be the one to tell him. Donovan looked at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back a single thumbs up, the most documented non-threat in the English language, put the phone in his pocket, and drove home under a fat desert moon, doing 2 miles under the limit the entire way. He smelled it before he saw it. Wood smoke and gasoline, and something chemical underneath, melted polyester. On the front lawn of the house on Mariposa Drive, his life was burning in a pile the size of a pickup bed. His clothes, his boots, his father's sign catalogs from 1974, the flag from his retirement, its wooden case split open in the coals. The fire had been fed and tended. Someone had used an accelerant and taken their time. Neighbors' windows flickered blue with television light, and not one porch lamp came on, because the truck parked across the street, big and black and lifted, had Warpath stickers in the back glass, and everyone on Mariposa Drive knew whose it was. Brock Strickland sat on the tailgate with a beer, watching the fire like a man watching his own fireplace, and did not stand up. Darla was on the porch, Donovan's porch, bought outright with deployment pay he had banked since long before the wedding. She had a glass of wine and a new bracelet, and she laughed, actually laughed, bright and brittle as breaking glass, when Donovan got out of his van and stood at the edge of the light with the fire warming the side of his face. "Accidents happen to stubborn men," she called across the lawn, and lifted her glass an inch, a toast. Behind her, through his own front window, Donovan could see a second silhouette move, one of the brothers, he noted automatically, from the height and the belt, off-duty and comfortable, a beer in hand, a guest. Every camera in Donovan's skull was running. The tended fire, arson, his property. Witnesses available. The text, a documented threat, preserved. The laugh, the truck, the silhouette. Later, men would ask each other what Donovan Ames did in that moment, the moment designed to break him or bait him, and the honest answer, sworn to by 3 separate neighbors peeking through blinds, is that he did nothing at all. He looked at the fire, he looked at his wife, he looked for one long second at Brock Strickland on the tailgate, until Brock's beer stopped halfway to his mouth, and something old and animal in the big man's brainstem tried, too late, to send up a flare. Then Donovan Ames nodded once, to the fire, to all of it, a man closing out an account, got back into his van, and drove away at 2 miles under the limit. Brock watched the taillights go, and laughed, and said the dumbest 6 words of his life. "Guess he got the message, huh?" Donovan took room 11 at the Sagebrush Motel on the east edge of town, under the neon Roadrunner he had rebuilt with his own hands, and paid Dottie Lehane cash for a month. Dottie was 70, ran the desk with a paperback and a pistol in the drawer, and asked no questions except whether he wanted the room facing the road or the mountain. "Road," Donovan said, and that one syllable was the first move of the war, though not even he would have called it that yet. He sat on the bed in the smell of old carpet and cold air conditioning, and took stock like a professional. What was burned, what was lost, what remained. And here is what the fire had missed, because ghosts do not keep what matters where they sleep. The shop, the storage unit out on Route 77 that even Darla had never known about, rented under an LLC since the week he retired, holding his archives, 20 years of a documentarian's habit, and 3 years of a quiet marriage's ledger. His tools, his name, his patience. He laid the burner notebook on the nightstand, opened it to a fresh page, and wrote 4 words at the top in the small, patient hand. GIM. Truck. Name. 2019. He did not yet know what 2019 meant. He only knew that when he had looked at Brock Strickland across the fire. 20 years of reading guilty men had told him the beer, the tailgate, the swagger, all of it sat on top of something buried. The way every loud man Donovan had ever dismantled was loud precisely to keep the world from listening in the right spot. 96 hours, he decided. 96 hours was what the ghost shop used to get for a full workup on a hard target. 4 days to open a man like a filing cabinet. He clicked off the lamp. Out on the road, the neon roadrunner he had brought back from the dead sprinted in place all night. 3 colors, tireless, going exactly nowhere. Like every man in Copperline who thought he had already won. Hour 0 began at 6 a.m. sharp, because wars should start on time. Donovan sat at the shop's workbench with black coffee and did what he had done for 20 years before touching any target. He built the file. Not revenge. Collection. On a length of butcher paper taped across the workshop wall, where the Copperline marquee letters usually hung, he mapped the target in grease pencil. Brock at the center. The 4 badges around him, the gym, the truck, the money, the marriage, and 1 empty box in the corner that he labeled with a question mark, because instinct told him it existed before evidence did. Rule 1 of the ghost shop, taught to him by a chief warrant officer, 23 years dead. Every loud man is loud to cover a silence. Find the silence. He started with the gym, and the gym took 1 phone call and a morning of public records. Because Brock Strickland had built his empire the way vain men always do. Quickly, cheaply, and certain no one would ever check. Donovan pulled the building permits for the old tractor dealership at the county office in Florence, and there it was on page 1. A steel mezzanine, 1,100 square feet of heavy racks and turf, floating over the main floor on columns that appeared in no engineering drawing ever filed. No permit, no stamped calculations, no inspection. He photographed the file with the county's own copy machine light glinting off his reading glasses, and the clerk, who had been 15 years behind that counter, would remember him only as polite. At 11:40 he bought a day pass to Warpath Fitness, with cash and a baseball cap, and nobody looked twice at one more quiet gray man among the grunting, because being unremarkable had been his profession. He rode a stationary bike for 50 minutes and let the cameras in his skull do the work. The east fire exit, chained and padlocked through the panic bar, a violation you could read from across the room. The extinguisher by the turf. Tag expired 14 months. The mezzanine above the free weight floor, bouncing, visibly, a 1/4 inch under a box jump class of 9. And through the propped door of the back office, in the 90 unguarded seconds while the front desk kid went to fix a protein shake machine, Donovan saw the thing he had actually come for. A wall of white product boxes with pharmacy labels, and a chest freezer with a hasp and padlock, which is not how anyone stores protein bars. He finished his ride, wiped down the bike like a courteous member, and left. 16 years of walking into warlords' compounds, and the hardest part of Warpath Fitness had been the parking. The afternoon went to the injured. Court records are public, and Warpath had been sued once. Quietly settled, sealed by agreement, but the initial filing survived. Jerome Pittman, a high school assistant coach, had shattered an ankle in 2023 when a plate rack pulled out of the mezzanine's undersized decking. The settlement had bought his silence about the fall, but no settlement on earth buys silence about a chained fire door. And when Donovan found him after practice and showed him 2 photographs, Jerome looked at them for a long time and then said, "You know what he told me while I was laying there? Walk it off, coach. Lawyers are for the weak." Jerome's attorney made 3 calls the next morning. At 4:15 p.m., hour 10, Donovan sat in his van and assembled the first package with the calm of a man folding parachutes. To the state fire marshal's tip line, the chained exit, the expired tags, the occupancy load, photographs, time-stamped. To the county building department, the phantom mezzanine, the permit file's own emptiness cited by page number. To the gym's insurance carrier, the same carrier he had noted with real professional pleasure, that had paid Brock's suspicious flood claim 2 winters ago. A courteous letter from a concerned member, itemizing every condition that voided the policy, because insurers move faster than any government when the thing at risk is their own money. 3 envelopes, 3 separate systems, none of them traceable to him, and none of them containing a single false word. That was the whole architecture of what Donovan Ames was about to do to these men, and it is why there was never anything they could do back. He never lied, never trespassed, never threatened. He just carried true facts to the exact desks where true facts detonate. Hour 26. The truck. It sat outside Warpath every morning like a monument. A black 1-ton dually on 40-inch tires, chrome skulls on the valve stems, come and take it across the back glass. Donovan ran it the way the ghost shop ran vehicles, from paper, backward. The VIN history came off a $50 commercial database and told a strange little story. The truck had been titled in 2019 as a salvage rebuild, but the title jump ran through a dealer in Quartzsite known for washing wrecks, and the odometer statement had lost 11,000 miles at the hop. That alone was a felony title fraud, and the lender who had financed Brock's loan against a clean title valuation would be fascinated. But it was the date that made Donovan sit very still in the van, with his thumb resting on the page. Retitled as Rebuilt, September 2019. Rebuilt from what? He pulled the salvage auction record. Front-end collision damage. Hood, grille, right fender, right headlamp assembly. The empty box on the butcher paper, the one with the question mark, acquired its first line of grease pencil that night. What did the truck hit in the summer of 2019? Ned Womack still ran the body shop out past the gravel yard. A man built like a whiskey barrel with 40 years of Bondo under his nails. And Ned had fixed every Strickland vehicle since the brothers were in high school. Until 2020, when they had abruptly moved their business to Casa Grande and stopped waving at him in traffic. Retired operators learn things in bars that subpoenas never find. Donovan brought a 12-pack and a restored Desert Rose Cafe sign for Ned's wife, and sat in the shop's oil-smelling dark, listening to a man talk himself towards something he had wanted to say for 6 years. It came out at 10 in the evening, low and careful. In August 2019, Randall Strickland had brought him Brock's truck on a Saturday night. Cash job, no paper, and stood in the bay the whole time watching. Front end caved, hood creased, and wedged in the shattered grille, Ned had found bent aluminum tubing and a scrap of red-painted alloy that had nothing to do with any truck. Looked like a piece of a bicycle, Ned said, to the floor. He'd kept his mouth shut for 6 years because his shop sat in Copperline and the Stricklands were the weather. But Ned Womack had also kept, in a coffee can on a shelf in his office, the scrap of red alloy and 4 photographs of the damage he'd taken for the file, which is what careful men say when they mean insurance against exactly this conversation. Always figured somebody'd come asking someday, he said. Figured it'd be somebody with a badge, though. Donovan said nothing. There was nothing yet to say, but the question mark on the butcher paper was gone by midnight, replaced by 3 words that changed the operation from a divorce into a debt. Who died? The answer was in the Copperline Courier's archive. 4 paragraphs. August 4th, 2019. Peter Dunlap, 24, a stalker at the town grocery, struck and killed by an unknown vehicle on Route 77 at night while cycling home from a closing shift. No witnesses, no arrests. The investigating agency, Copperline PD. The case had gone cold in 11 days. 11 days for a dead local boy on an empty straight road, and the sergeant quoted in the paper, promising that the department was pursuing every lead, was Randall Strickland. Donovan read the article 3 times. Then he drove out to Route 77 in the dark, stood on the gravel shoulder where a 24-year-old had bled out under the same fat desert moon, and made the only promise of the entire 96 hours that he made out loud. The rest of that night was for the name, and the name was the easiest, because Brock had built it out of cardboard. Donovan had sat through 2 decades of cover story debriefs, and he could hear a manufactured legend the way a piano tuner hears a flat string. Brock's Ranger stories never had logistics in them, no duty stations that lined up, no unit numbers, no names of men. So Donovan did what any citizen may lawfully do. He filed a records request with the National Personnel Records Center for the releasable service summary of Brock Strickland. And then, because federal paper takes weeks and he had hours, he called Maurice Webb. Master Sergeant Maurice Webb, retired, had spent 11 years in the ghost shop beside Donovan, had twice been dragged out of trouble on Donovan's shoulder, and now carried a badge and a federal ID as a special agent with the FBI's Public Corruption Squad in Phoenix. It was a 15-minute call. Donovan talked for 12. There was a long silence, the sound of a man closing his office door, and then Maurice said the thing that made everything after legal, clean, and unstoppable. Donovan, we have had a quiet file on that evidence room for a year. Seizure ledgers in 3 counties that don't add up. You just handed us the keys. Send me all of it. Tonight. And Ames, don't touch them. You hear me? You've already skinned this thing. Let me cook it. The verification came back through channels by Friday afternoon. Brock Strickland had washed out of the Ranger indoctrination program in week 2, in 1994, and spent his enlistment as a supply clerk at Fort Hood. Honorable service, ordinary service. Service a decent man could wear with plain pride. He had chosen instead to wear a dead men's tab to fundraisers for decades. The releasable summary was public record. That evening, Donovan dropped a copy, with the Veterans Day speech transcribed beside it, at the door of the local VFW post commander, whose members included 2 actual Rangers, one of whom had buried a nephew from the 75th. A second copy went to the Copperline Courier's night desk. He did not write one editorial word on either. True facts, exact desks. By hour 50, the first structure was already falling, faster than even Donovan had scheduled, because rot carries load right up until the day someone leans on it. The fire marshal's office, embarrassed by photographs of a chained exit, made an unannounced Friday inspection at peak hours, found every condition as described, plus a nitrogen oxide leak at the cold plunge, and red-tagged the building, occupancy suspended, doors posted, members filming it all on their phones in the parking lot. The county followed with a stop-use order on the mezzanine. The insurance carrier, reading the marshal's report with the flood claim already flagged in its fraud unit, issued a reservation of rights letter by end of day and froze the pending claim Brock had submitted 3 weeks earlier for a conveniently burgled inventory of supplements. Jerome Pittman's attorney filed to reopen. The powerlifting team's sponsors, 3 bars and a tire shop, every one of them a business that had been quietly paying the Stricklands to be left alone, read the wind with the fine instincts of the long oppressed, and pulled out inside a single day. Warpath Fitness, a junction box with the power cut, went dark. On the 4th morning, hour 72, the lender's recovery agent, armed with the title fraud file that an anonymous, immaculately organized packet had delivered to its fraud department, winched the black dually off the Warpath lot at 6:05 a.m., skull valve stems and all, while Brock Strickland stood in the empty parking lot of his padlocked gym in gym shorts, screaming at a tow operator who had a lawful order and a camera vest and had genuinely never enjoyed a repossession more. And Copperline began, softly, to talk. That was the part Brock could not fight, could never fight, because his entire life had been engineered to run on the town's applause. The Courier put the service records on its website Saturday morning, beneath the headline, Local Gym Owners Ranger Claims Unravel, and the VFW, in a 2-line statement of Arctic courtesy, disinvited him from the Veterans Day program. The barstools turned on him with the speed of all shallow loyalty. By hour 90, the man who had sat on a tailgate watching another man's life burn had lost the gym, the truck, the sponsors, the applause, and the name he had spent half a lifetime embroidering. And he still had absolutely no idea what was happening to him. That was the measure of the craft. Brock raged at the fire marshal, accused the insurance company, threatened the newspaper, blamed a business rival in Casa Grande. Not once, in those first 3 days, did it occur to him that the quiet man from the lawn had done anything but get the message. But Randall Strickland was not Brock, and this is where the story tightens. Because Randall had spent 28 years as a cop and possessed, unlike his brother, a fully functioning sense of smell. 4 systems failing in 4 days is not weather, it is targeting. On Saturday night, the brothers convened in Randall's garage. Beer, folding chairs, the old easy hierarchy, and Randall stood at a workbench turning a beer cap over in his fingers like a bad coin, and said the quiet part. Permits, title records, service records. That's not a mad husband, that's a workup. Somebody who knows how paper works is pulling our threads. And then Perry, soft-spoken Perry of the evidence room, the family's own archivist, said the sentence that would eventually be read aloud in a federal courtroom, because a court-authorized listening device had lived in that garage for 2 weeks by then, planted under the Phoenix office's quiet year-old file on the Copperline evidence room, a file that had gone loud the moment Donovan's package landed. Long as nobody pulls that 2019 thread, we're fine. And that thread's in my building. They decided, in that garage, on the old family medicine. Pressure. The kind of pressure that had always worked in Copperline, that had moved every stubborn seller and silenced every complainer for 2 generations. Find the quiet man at his sad little motel. kick his door at 2 in the morning, badges and bare fists and 5 against 1, and explain to him, off the record, the Strickland way, what happens to men who don't take the hint. Garland, the youngest, shifted in his folding chair and said maybe they should slow down, and Randall put a hand on his neck, gently, the way their father used to, and said the other sentence the jury would hear twice. Little brother, who's he gonna call? We are the police. 96 hours after a thumbs-up emoji, the file was complete, and Donovan Ames sat in room 11 of the Sagebrush Motel and did the last honest arithmetic of the operation. The gym, gone. The truck, on a fraud hold in a lender's lot. The name, Ash. That left the alibi, the deep charge, the one that was never his to fire. Everything now lived in 3 places, with Maurice Webb's squad in Phoenix, who had opened a full public corruption file the moment Ned's photographs and the evidence room pattern crossed his desk, with the Arizona Department of Public Safety's cold case unit re-examining a bicycle, and in certified mail copies with a Tucson attorney named Paloma Estrada, who had instructions and a schedule. Donovan had built the entire pyre and handed the matches to the federal government, and his own hands were empty, clean, and folded. There remained only one thing he knew that no one else did. He knew men. He knew that a family like the Stricklands, stripped of money and applause in 96 hours, would not call a lawyer. Cornered kings always reach for the sword. They would come to his door, at night, together, wearing the thing that had always made them untouchable. And the only question was whether Donovan would be ready to receive them. He looked around room 11, at the road-facing window he had chosen on the first night, at the walls he had spent 4 quiet evenings preparing, and allowed himself the operation's single luxury, a small, patient smile. Of course they would come. He was counting on it. Room 11 of the Sagebrush Motel was not a room anymore. It was a set, dressed by a professional, and it had been one since the 3rd night, which is the detail that people in Copperline still argue about at the diner. The raid did not surprise Donovan Ames. The raid was the plan. The motel itself was the first move. A man with a paid-off commercial building, a storage unit, and friends in Phoenix does not need to sleep in a $49 room under a neon Roadrunner. He needs to be seen sleeping there, weak, alone, static. Bait is only bait if it looks like it cannot bite back. Donovan had chosen the road-facing room for its sightlines, and Dottie Lehane, who had run a motel desk for 40 years and missed nothing, had taken one look at the quiet man paying cash and asked exactly one question. "This trouble gonna land on my property?" To which Donovan had replied by telling her, with a candor that surprised even him, precisely what he believed was coming. Dottie had lost a brother to a Copperline PD resisting arrest in 1988. She moved the only other guest to the far wing, comped herself a vacation to her sisters in Yuma for the weekend, and left Donovan the master key and a note that said, in blue ballpoint, "Get 'em, hun." The wiring took him one afternoon and change from a hardware store in Casa Grande, paid in cash. 3 cameras inside, clock radio, smoke detector, a gap in the curtain valance, one under the Roadrunner sign covering the parking lot, one in the ice machine alcove covering the walkway, all of it recording locally and streaming off-site to 2 places at once. Paloma Estrada's office server in Tucson, and a link Maurice Webb had blessed after a conversation with an assistant United States attorney that had ended with the ASA rubbing her temples and saying, "So the subjects of an active corruption file may commit a home invasion of a federal witness, on camera, and your witness is using himself as the lure. I want it in writing that I hate this." Because that was the second thing the brothers did not know. The moment Ned's photographs and the truck's paper trail had crossed Maurice's desk, Donovan Ames had stopped being an angry husband and become a cooperating federal witness, and everything that touched him had begun to glow, legally speaking, with a radioactive light. Susanna Dill. That name matters here. 19 years a Copperline dispatcher, she had quietly kept her own printouts since 2019, when a call log she personally took, a motorist reporting a black lifted truck weaving north on Route 77, 11 minutes before Pete Dunlap was found, vanished from the CAD system by morning. She had waited 6 years for someone to ask. Maurice Webb asked. The garage device had already caught the meeting. The ASA would not authorize agents inside the room. A witness is not a trap house. And nobody wanted a firefight. But she authorized everything short of it. And so on the 5th night, Saturday bleeding into Sunday, The pieces sat in the dark around the Sagebrush Motel, like patient furniture. 2 DP's SWAT vans behind the shuttered feed store across the road, 4 unmarked federal vehicles staged at the truck stop a half-mile out, a state trooper named Sergeant Antonia Ruiz lying prone on the feed store roof with night optics and a radio, and in room 11, in the armchair he had repositioned to face the door at an oblique angle. Out of the fatal funnel, old habits. Donovan Ames, awake, dressed, drinking coffee, wearing a recorder and no weapon of any kind. That was Paloma Estrada's one commandment and his own conclusion besides, unarmed. The entire architecture of the night depended on one fact being beyond argument at trial, that every ounce of violence in that room belonged to them. They came at 1:52 a.m., 8 minutes early, 5 men in 2 vehicles with the plates removed, which was itself a 6-count decision, and they came exactly as vain, frightened men come, loud. Wayne's spare cruiser, the plate removal notwithstanding, it still had the push bar, rolled into the lot with its lights off, followed by Randall's personal Suburban. Sergeant Ruiz's voice went out soft on the radio. All units. Visual. 5 subjects. Moving to room 11. Brock first. A tire iron swinging low in his right hand. Randall and Wayne flanking, both armed, badges on chains around their necks like talismans. Off-duty, out of jurisdiction, and wearing them anyway, which the OSA would later call, in her opening statement, the single most honest thing the defendants did that night. They told you themselves, in metal, that they believed the badge made this legal. Perry stayed at the wheel of the Suburban, engine running, because archivists keep the getaway. Garland came last, slow, hands empty, looking over his shoulder twice. Details a jury would eventually weigh in the currency of years. The door of room 11 came off its hinges at the second kick, and 5 men's shadows fell into a room that was already lit. Donovan had turned on the lamp when the radio clicked once in his ear, so that the cameras caught everything in warm, clean, 75-watt color. Brock filling the doorway with the tire iron up, Randall's pistol drawn and rising, Wayne behind him shouting a word he had shouted through 100 lawful doors, and would never get to shout again, and in the armchair, legs crossed, coffee steaming on the armrest, the quiet man, who did not stand, did not flinch, and said, at a conversational volume the clock radio microphone rendered perfectly, "Evening, gentlemen. Before anybody does anything permanent, you're live. 3 cameras, 2 servers, one of them federal. Sergeant Strickland. The Bureau has been listening to this family for weeks. They have the garage. They have Perry's 2019 thread. They have all of it." He picked up his coffee and took a sip, and into the ringing silence. The tire iron sagging, 5 men's eyes finding the smoke detector, the valance, the sudden white blaze of floodlights, soaking the parking lot as DPS lit the world from 3 directions, and a bullhorn voice ordered hands where they could be seen. Donovan Ames set down the cup, looked up at Brock Strickland the way he had looked at him across the fire, and finished the account. "You told me to come home so you could put me in the ground. Look around, son. I brought the ground to you." No shots were fired at the Sagebrush Motel. That fact belongs to Garland Strickland, who was the first man to put his hands on his head, and to Randall, who, hearing his own garage sentences quoted back at him through a bullhorn, performed the only professional police work of his night, and set his pistol on the concrete. Brock, tire iron still in hand, took one convulsive step toward the armchair, and stopped, because Donovan hadn't moved, and there has never been anything on this earth as stopping as a man who is not afraid of you. 5 arrests in 90 seconds. Perry was taken at the wheel. The federal agents came out of the dark with the unhurried gait of men whose paperwork was already done. The unraveling after that was not a collapse. It was a controlled demolition, floor by floor, each charge placed weeks earlier by a man in reading glasses at a workbench. The 5 were charged federally by Wednesday. Conspiracy against rights, the home invasion itself, obstruction, the state-stacked burglary, aggravated assault, and, for Brock, the reopened charge that mattered most, manslaughter and felony hit-and-run for the death of Peter Dunlap, August 2019, supported by Ned Womack's coffee can photographs, the red alloy scrap whose paint the lab matched to Pete's Schwinn, the resurrected CAD log, and the salvage title paper trail Donovan had gift-wrapped. Perry, facing evidence tampering counts that carried more time than his brothers, juries forgive fists before they forgive filing cabinets, discovered the limits of family, and traded the whole architecture. The steroid pipeline out of the evidence room, the bar shakedowns, the flood claim, and the night in 2019 when Randall had woken him with the words, "Family thing, bring your keys." Chief Dub Hensley resigned 11 days before his pension vested, which in Copperline was received as the harshest sentence of all. Garland alone had cooperated from the first hour, and drew probation and a lifetime ban from law enforcement. At sentencing, he turned around in the courtroom, found Lois Dunlap in the second row, and said, "I'm sorry," twice, once for the door and once for the 6 years. And Lois, Pete's mother, a school cafeteria manager who had written to the department every August asking if there was news, nodded at him the way you nod at weather that has finally passed. Darla's reckoning arrived not with a bang but with an adjuster. The homeowner's claim she had filed the week after the lawn fire, listing Donovan's property as stolen in a burglary, right down to the flag case, collided with the arson report Donovan had quietly filed the morning after, and with drone angle photographs of the fire that Sergeant Ruiz's people found on Brock's own phone, time-stamped, gloating. Insurance fraud, false reporting, and a conspiracy count for the texts she had sent Brock that evening. "He's leaving Phoenix now. You've got 2 hours," which reframed the bonfire from cruelty to coordination. She took a plea, restitution, 18 months probation, a felony record. The divorce, when it finally reached a judge, took 40 minutes. The house on Mariposa Drive had been bought with premarital deployment savings and titled accordingly, because ghosts read documents before they signed them. Adultery, arson, and a felony plea did the rest. She kept her car, her bracelet, and the box of things that had been hers. On the courthouse steps, she finally looked at Donovan, the first time she had truly looked at him in 2 years, and said, "You never even raised your voice." It was the closest thing to an accurate account of the marriage either of them ever gave, and Donovan, who had loved her once with the whole patient weight of a man who had waited his entire life to be one person in one place, found that he had nothing at all to nod at and simply walked to his van. Copperline did what towns do after the weather breaks. It aired out. The Department of Justice consent decree brought a new chief from El Paso, a woman who reinstated Susanna Dill with back pay and a commendation, and put her in charge of records integrity, on the reasonable theory that the person who had guarded the truth for 6 years unpaid could be trusted to do it for a salary. The Warpath building sold at auction. It is a physical therapy clinic now, and the fire exits open. Ned Womack finally hung the Desert Rose Cafe sign in his office window. The VFW asked the actual ranger to speak that Veterans Day, and he talked for 4 minutes about a supply clerk he'd served with who never lied about anything. And everyone understood. The last scene belongs where Donovan chose to put it. That spring, the town council voted to relight the old Copperline Theater marquee, the sign his father had first hung in 1974, the one whose letters had leaned against the shop's back wall through everything. Donovan restored it at cost, every tube bent by hand at the bench, and on a warm Friday evening half the town gathered on Main Street for the switch-on. He asked Lois Dunlap to throw it. She wore Pete's old grocery name tag pinned to her cardigan, put her hand on the big brass knife switch Donovan had polished for the occasion, and pulled it, and 1,100 feet of new neon went up the dark like a sunrise learning to spell, and Copperline made a sound it had not made in years. Donovan stood at the back of the crowd, where he had spent his whole life standing, in the town where he had finally, entirely, come home. A man who had been 100 people, applauding quietly in the dark, needing to be no one but himself. Somewhere behind him, the sagebrush roadrunner sprinted in place, 3 colors, tireless. The ghost had one name now. It was on the shop. It was made of light. So that's the story of Donovan Ames, and I've got to be honest with you. The detail I can't stop thinking about isn't the raid, or the cameras, or even that line about bringing the ground to them. It's the thumbs up. A man reads a death threat at a gas station, and his entire answer is one emoji. Because here's what 20 years of ghost work had actually taught him, and what I think it teaches us. Rage is a confession. The Stricklands ran a whole town on being loud. Loud trucks, loud badges, loud stories. And every decibel of it was rent they paid to keep anyone from listening closely. Donovan never once matched their volume, and that's why he won. He understood something most of us never learn. You don't beat a corrupt system by swinging at it. You beat it by being more organized than it is. Every single weapon he used was a public record, a preserved text, a photograph, a filing. The man never broke one law, and 4 of the 5 men who kicked that door are in federal prison. Let that sink in. And the other thing I hope you carry out of this one: quiet people are not weak people. The dispatcher who kept her printouts for 6 years. The body shop man with his coffee can. The motel owner who handed over her master key. All that patient waiting truth needed was one man brave enough to ask. So if life burns your things on the lawn, don't scream. Take the photograph, write it down, find the exact desk where the truth detonates. Then nod once, and get to work. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe. Share it with somebody who's being loud bullied right now. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done at hour 0? I'll see you in the next one. This is Nathan, signing off.